Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone watching this right now. Thank you for coming back for episode two. I'll be honest with you, we were pretty overwhelmed with some of the feedback that we got. We kind of just, we were laughing about this last week. We wanted to start a conversation with our colleagues and our friends and our social network. We weren't really sure what was going to happen. We were pretty overwhelmed with the amount of support and feedback we got from this. So we thought we'd open up for phase two. So, welcome everyone back again. My name is Matt. With me today, of course, is Mike.
Hey guys,
And
yeah, it's funny that when the feedback we got, one of the key pieces of feedback wasn't actually on the content. It was we don't like your background, so why don't you change it up in your home office to put a little bit more interesting background or a picture behind. So, hence the Matt and I both just rotating our direction in our respective condos.
We only have so much. We only have so much room to work with. Yeah, we only have so much work to deal with. Mike obviously found the last painting on Amazon he could get his hands on, and here we are.
I take offense to that. There's a story behind this thing.
I'm sure there is. So, anyways, thanks again, everyone, for watching. I guess call it episode one. We're back for episode two. I think one of the major themes, major feedback, major things that we've been asked over the last little while is, okay, that was really interesting. We agree. We think people want to get back to the office. I can tell you from all the employees that I'm talking to, this is obviously from colleagues, they want to get back. One of the things that we're constantly hearing, and one of the feedback we got a lot from last time was, what's it going to look like when they get back? How can I positively affect the work environment for people coming back? I think it's really important to note today is Wednesday, June 24th, as of recording. Toronto is now officially in phase two. So Toronto and Peel are now in phase two, joining the rest of kind of Ontario. So this has never been more topical. It's certainly a question that we're getting all the time. So what we thought we'd do today is we are very fortunate, obviously at JLL, to have such a global reach. And we've been able to really start to see the feedback and the data coming from our colleagues across really Asia as they started working back towards their offices. Also putting together a ton of surveys and data behind the scene. And what we thought we would do today is compile some of that data in a really kind of easy, digestible way, looking at it from returning employees and their both anxiety levels on different tasks that they have to perform in the office, their frustration levels in terms of anything that they are performing, and then maybe more importantly, what you can do as an employer to positively affect those things. Some things are easy to make a positive adjustment. Little things you might not have thought of. Some things are more challenging. So we'll walk through kind of those individually today. Yeah, and again, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Why don't we dive in, Mike?
Let's dive in. Yeah, we want to give you a visual of it. What's your day going to look like?
Yeah,
and we're going to start right from the beginning. Is people are going to have to get to work. If we don't bring employees back to the office, they're not going to appear there. You have to bring them from their homes into the office. And transit is obviously a huge component of that. And it really depends on if you're a suburban worker or a downtown worker are you using transit? What type of transit are you using?
Right.
So, Matt, let's start to explore this idea is what can an employee expect when trying to get to work, and how are they going to feel when going through that process?
Yeah, so good question. So, looking at it, we'll start macro, and then we'll dive into the micro, Mike. On a macro level, pre-lockdown, in terms of downtown office workers, almost just under 50% of them took public transit coming through Union Station every day. 300,000 people got to work through Union Station, either on the GO train or on the TTC subway every single day. You can appreciate that as a huge amount of people. In fact, if all 300,000 of those people worked in office buildings, and we're not saying that they do, but if they did, that would actually be over half of the downtown core's office working population. So it's just a massive amount of people coming through. Now, listen, first things first, we're only anticipating that offices, as they start to open, will be kind of for 25, 30, 35% of their people. So naturally, there's going to be less people taking public transit every day. There'll likely be less people on the road, though I think you'll see more people driving that normally would have taken public transit. So I think one of the first things you can positively do, and just to give that understanding on what we're calling the anxiety scale based on the feedback, that's a 3 out of 5. In terms of the
Yeah.
frustration level of employees, it's only a 1 out of 5 because that's what they're actually used to on a daily basis.
It's
Mike,
their
to get back
routine,
to that.
right? They know how to
Mike,
get to work, but all of a sudden now they're thinking about things like, let's say they're a downtown employee, and we know that Toronto, I think we're the third highest utilization of transit for office workers in North
mhm,
America, so we're up there. And normally you're getting into a packed subway car.
right,
Now it might spread out, but you're wearing a mask if you're getting on the subway. Some people have so much subway anxiety, they're not getting on in all of
right,
2020, maybe 2021. Some people have more comfort. So, depending on the individual employee, the company has to accommodate those comfort levels. And that's why that
exactly.
anxiety is so high. So, if there's, let's say, an employee that does not want to come into the office out of discomfort with the subway, can they drive down instead? Can the
Right,
company maybe accommodate some parking for them
right,
so they can commute in a way they're comfortable with? Maybe
right,
there's multiple offices in the GTA. Can they work out of a suburban location versus a downtown location?
right.
So creating that accommodation will help relieve some of that anxiety.
Yeah,
The
I
ones,
think that's a really good way to put it, Mike. And I think the number one takeaway, really through all of the ones that we're going to walk you through today, is communication. Right, it's just openly communicating with your employees on their comfort levels. Obviously, based on our data, 3 out of 5 anxiety level is the average. That takes both commuters, being drivers, being people on the TTC, being people on the GO train. I can, and I don't have data to back this up. Anecdotally, I can say people looking at the TTC or the GO train are higher than a 3 out of 5. People driving are generally less than a 3 out of 5 in terms of their anxiety
yeah,
level of risks that they're putting themselves into. So,
yeah. And
again,
hey,
it's
if they're
just
not sitting in traffic, they might even lower anxiety. Maybe it'll be a delight. Who knows?
right. So I think it's that continued communication. But remembering there is a reason why people want to work in the downtown core, right? Pre-COVID, that everything the downtown core is at 2% vacancy levels. Obviously, suburban vacancy levels were higher, but actually quite strong over the last, call it, 24 months. But if you look at 2% in the core, there's a reason people want to be down there. One of them is because it has superior access to public transit. Again, Toronto is the second highest population who use public transit to get to work in North America, only behind New York City. So when you actually think about it, there is a real advantage for us having this great transit. And I think it's one of the things on a go forward that we'll continue to see. So next up,
Yeah,
I guess number 2, Mike, the arrival at the office. So there was a lot of talk early on, I think, about 2 things: elevators, and then PPE and screening. So why don't we quickly just dive into those? In terms of
yeah.
elevators, on the
So it's
anxiety scale, I'll give you the stat quickly. Anxiety scale 4 to 5, frustration level 4 to 5, highest amongst the board on both levels. So
right, and that makes
that has
sense.
been,
It's really interesting how elevators off the bat, you don't think about like going to the office, and then when they start exploring this, if you're in a downtown 60-story office tower, elevators are part of your commute to work.
yeah,
And there's 2 things that are going to be relevant. One is the anxiety. So how comfortable are you as an employee getting in an elevator with 2 other people, 3 other people? How do they set it up? I know I've seen in downtown office buildings where if it's a 4-person cab, a bigger cab, they'll make it a 4-person cab and have little where to stand signs in each corner of the elevator and which way to face.
right,
So they try to make it as clean and sanitary as possible. But some people might be very uncomfortable standing in an elevator with somebody, or heaven forbid, can you imagine hearing somebody cough in an elevator with you and the anxiety that would create?
right.
So you're taking these elevators and you're making them as sanitary as possible. But even if you're at maximum 4 people to an elevator, if you're all getting to work at 8:30 or at 9 o'clock, you're standing in a line that's maybe going down the hallway of the office building because
So,
everyone's taking that same elevator. Hopefully not.
well, so here's again, we'll come back to this, I think, throughout the conversation, this idea of a headline versus a trend line. So the headline is elevators are dangerous. Elevators are going to be cramped. Elevators are not a good place to be. There'll be huge lines for elevators. The trend line that we saw out of our colleagues in Asia as they reopened, actually, that wasn't as big of a deal. Remember, again, to start, you're only looking at 25 to 30% of the population coming back to the actual office space. In terms of elevators, everyone is going to space themselves out naturally throughout the day. Some people get there at 7 a.m. now to beat the rush. Some will get there a little bit later in the day. So it wasn't actually as big of an issue as they thought it was going to be. Again, the headline will tell you that, oh, you're going to be waiting for an hour to get into your office building. I'm not going to tell you that's not going to be the case. That's just not the data that we've seen come back out of our colleagues. So just keep that in mind. In terms of things you can do to positively affect this, obviously, if you're an office tenant right now that controls an elevator bank, fantastic. It'll be a lot easier for you to control. Most employers don't control their elevator banks. So I think one of the major things and the major theme of today, communication, work with your landlords, work with your employees, work with your neighbors, do the best you can. It is going to cause anxiety. It is going to cause frustration levels. They were both, obviously highest on the scale on that level. Just communicate through that. But I think overall, and this dovetails into our next one, which is PPE, wearing proper PPE, having masks. Again, all these elevators are controlled by the landlords. The landlords have done great things so far to get their office buildings prepared for people to come back. Landlords want people back in their offices, right? Makes natural sense. Business. So they've done a great job of getting ready for it. I think it's going to be one of those things like everything. I know the first time, for example, I went back to a grocery store during COVID, I was nervous. I had anxiety. I had not necessarily frustration, but I had that. Now you go back in, you put on your mask, and you do your normal business, and it's funny how quickly people adjust to the normal again. So that does dovetail into our next one. Mike, go ahead.
So PP&E, and that's one thing. Clearly, easy thing an employer can do and really should do is an employer should be a provider of PP&E for their staff.
Right.
And that's things like face masks. So whatever face masks are required, they're F95s. What are they?
N95s if you can get your hands on them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The N95 masks, you can procure those for your employees, have them ready so that they can bring them and they don't have to fund them themselves and procure them themselves.
Right.
And then making sure that if it's in the office that you have dividers up if necessary for benching, or you're able to split employees up. But that PP&E is something that either the employer provides or works with the landlord to provide.
Right. Yeah, I think the positive thing, again, one of the reasons we're now, I think we're 3.5 months into this lockdown from our office buildings, masks have really become commonplace. The data backs it up as well. The chance of spreading viruses right now, if both parties wear a mask, is dramatically lower than if neither party does or only one of the two parties does. So obviously, I think most employers by now have gone out and been able to secure PPE, which is fantastic. The other thing that was maybe a headline versus a trend line to start was screening upon arrival to your office. So initially, the understanding
what does that mean,
everyone, exactly. Everyone's going to be temperature checked. Everyone's going to have to pass COVID test before coming back to the office. It is an employer's, I guess, decision on how they want to do that. Our understanding from most is that they will not be doing temperature checking on arrival to your office building. Again, work with your employees, work with your employer to understand what your protocols are internally. But I think overall, if you're putting all of your people back, or 20 to 30% of your people back in the office building, you want to obviously ensure that they're safe. Obviously, this. And maybe this goes without saying, but if someone does have symptoms, really encourage them to stay home. Make sure they're staying home. I think
right.
And
these are just being an adult who goes to work every day.
Right.
I mean, initially with our company, they were saying that at the front you had somebody on duty to ask every employee arriving, "Are you feeling sick today? Have you had any symptoms recently?" Like when you would go to the LCBO, for example, and then they came back on that, realizing that they have informed employees not to come to work if that's the case. And I think that most people have figured that out, that you should not be coming to work if you have symptoms.
Right. And I think it goes back to the reason we're looking at this on an anxiety scale versus a frustration scale. Those type of advanced screenings actually encourage or promote anxiety and frustration. So it's a balance. Obviously, first and foremost, safety. Right. Don't take anything. If you take one thing away from this conversation, safety first. But it is important to work with your employees, understand kind of where they are in terms of that anxiety and frustration, and then the best way to move forward safely. So next one up, and this one I think is fascinating, one that we're getting questions about all the time. One that is a real sore spot for me because I'm an avid coffee drinker. But what are my coffee breaks and lunch breaks going to look like? So in terms of anxiety and frustration, coffee breaks 3 out of 5 in terms of anxiety scale for people going back. Only 2 out of 5 for frustration. I don't understand how anyone would be 2 out of 5. It's the best time of the day when you get to have your coffee. But again, maybe that's just me in terms of lunch. terms of lunch breaks, 4 to 5 in terms of the anxiety scale, 3 to 5 in terms of the frustration scale. And again, that anxiety scale is really understanding, before people go back, where they're really worried about. As people start to get back and start to see the improvements that offices have made, that anxiety comes down quite a bit. So, Mike, why don't we talk through coffee breaks, lunch breaks, ways that you can affect that positively?
Yeah, so it's just interesting. Like when I first heard that, it's like, how do you get people back to the office if everyone drinks
Right.
from the same coffee machine? It is
Right.
one of those central touch points that you cannot spread out. How do you make people feel safe to use their coffee machine? Is it cleaned after every use? Is that protocol that people have to clean it? And do you trust your fellow employees to do it? Do you bring in coffees for people instead of serving it out of your cafeteria? So it's just one of those frustrations that we didn't really have to think about, but your employees are going to need coffee and they're going to want to feel safe doing it.
Right.
And then when it comes to, sitting and having a coffee in your cafeteria, or same thing with lunch, is you can't have employees congregating and having a little lunch crew as they normally would if you're trying to social distance them.
Right.
So we've seen, and we've seen this starting in offices, is the idea of wayfinding signs and do not sit signs. So you can imagine going into your lunchroom where every alternating seat across a large lunchroom table will be off limits, so that you're forcing employees to sit only in certain areas that you've identified as being 6 feet apart.
Right.
It ruins some of that cultural element, but it's part of the safety protocol that we have to do, and that's why there's a bit of frustration.
Well, so one of the simplest ways to avoid, the frustration or the anxiety around lunchrooms and coffee breaks is to just shut them down. I think you'll see quite a few offices decides that the lunchrooms are just off limits. You will have to eat at your desk, as we start to work back. One of the ways that I think a lot of companies are looking to, again, we always look at this as a give and take. One of the ways that employers can maybe positively affect that is by providing lunch, catering, catering and coffees, catering and lunch. There are ways to go about it to make it safe that I think are really positive. In terms of coffee break, if you can, bring your coffee from home, I know that's not ideal for everyone, but there are ways that we can work to reduce that anxiety level. So it is just one of those things where everyone has to kind of work through that together. The reason that I think it's in terms of lunchroom breaks is low on the frustration scale is because people do want to be back with their colleagues. They do want to find a way to make that work. So, it's just one of those things, again, 6 feet distance, try to reduce the amount of people who are doing it. If you have a way to eat at your desk, that's probably ideal. That's probably the best way to move forward. But with that said, again, it's, there are options
expectations.
Here.
Communicate with your staff of what they should expect when they're going back to the office for coffee and for lunchroom, so they can plan at home and make the appropriate accommodations for themselves.
Exactly right. And again, you have to keep in back in mind, we're probably only looking at 25 to 30% of people getting back in this kind of wave one. So it's a nice way to get people back who are comfortable. It's also a good way to understand how this works and keep everyone safe. So next one up, bathroom breaks. So I don't think this will be a surprise. Very high on the anxiety scale, 4 to 5, 3 to 5 on the frustration scale. So, one of the, I guess, again, headline versus trend line. Well, am I ever going to be able to use the bathroom? How can I use the bathroom? It's going to be crowded. There's going to be people in there. There's no way I can keep 6 feet apart in the bathroom. All valid concerns. No, I don't think anyone's going to fight you on that. So, Mike, what are some of the ways that employers and employees can work together to make a safer place for this?
And there's a difference between, and an anxiety difference between, does an employer control their bathroom because it's controlling a whole floor, for example, or inside their premises? Or is that a shared floor with a shared bathroom? And you might trust your coworkers, but you don't trust the coworkers in the other business down the hall.
Exactly right.
What you're probably going to see is both in both circumstances, depending on if it's the landlord or the tenant's responsibility, is maybe they'll start to install essentially like the handicap access, where you either hit it with your elbow or wave sensor to open up the door for you to make it feel a little bit better. But this is certainly an anxiety level that exists, and there might be some more internal protocols of how to handle a bathroom situation or a bathroom capacity control to make sure that you're not putting, a heavy bathroom usage times is 5 people in there.
Yeah, that seems to be the number one. That seems to be the number one suggestion coming out of our colleagues that have reopened across the globe is capacities. So just understanding capacities, whether it's 2 at a time, depending on how big your washroom is, it seems to be 2 at a time is the appropriate way to go about it. You can still maintain distancing. Obviously, I think a really important thing to remember too with washrooms, for most offices, the washroom is the place where you go to wash your hands. I think we all know washing your hands has never been more important than it is now. So people who arrive into the office every day, if they're coming off of, GO trains or the TTC, I can guarantee the first thing they're going to want to do is wash their hands. So just understanding that, putting capacities in placing, again, reducing that anxiety. I'm not sure if you can reduce the frustration. There's always frustration if you have to wait in lines naturally for people, but I think that's one of those ones where you really want to cater to the anxiety levels, maybe less on the frustration levels.
Sure.
Okay, next one up. We're just rolling through. There's a couple more to go. Collaborating with your colleagues. So in terms of the anxiety scale, again, if you look at the anxiety scale, this is a higher one, 3 to 5. Anytime people are getting together and congregating, that's pushing up the anxiety scale. Frustration scale, only a 1 out of 5, as low as you could go. People want to go back to the office so that they can collaborate and communicate with their employees. That's the number one reason most people want to go back. So, Mike, what are we doing? What are we seeing? What have some of our other offices across the globe done?
So I think there's a couple of different call it not extremes, but positions a company could take.
Yeah.
One is you could shut down all meeting rooms, which is a way to keep people safe and from sitting in the same place as somebody else over the day, but it defeats the purpose of the collaborative office environment. So that's one way to keep people safe, but it doesn't fulfill the need people need to go to work.
Right.
You could also have meeting rooms where there's capacity limits, where a 6-person meeting room is now a 2 or 3-person meeting room. The 12-person meeting room is now a 5 or 6-person meeting room. And the 2-person meeting rooms are solo rooms. So you can limit the capacity of those rooms in the same way as a lunchroom, where there's do not sit signs and capacity signs in front of those rooms to keep people feeling safe and still allowing them in there to collaborate.
Yep. And again, I think this is so important, because this is one of the major reasons people want to go back, as we talked about last week when we looked at the people who wanted to go back to the office. One of the biggest reasons why is collaborating with employees or colleagues. And remember, for a lot of people, this is your social circle. These are the people, these are your friends. In some cases, these are the people that you talk to throughout the days. In a lot of cases, you spend more time with them than you do with your own family during normal times. There's a major reason people want to get back, to be able to collaborate and work with their employees. You can appreciate why it's higher on the anxiety scale, lower on the frustration scale. I think to Mike's point, just understanding that I think for some offices, keeping meeting rooms closed is actually going to be the best way to go about it. Again, if you imagine a row of cubicles, at any given time, there'll be far less people working within those cubicles. It'll be much easier to have called open style meetings where you can collaborate with your colleagues. So there are ways to go about it. I think overall, it's just doing the right thing for you and your company, even if that means shutting down meeting rooms to start. That might be the best way to reduce some of the issues. So,
and in terms of, just one more point on that, just in terms of long-term strategies, collaboration now is going to have to be with people working from home. So companies might have to upgrade their IT requirements in those meeting rooms for better video conferencing in all of their meeting rooms, because half your employees might be sitting in that room and half might be on Zoom.
Yeah, it's a critical. Thank you. It's a great point. Understanding those IT requirements that go into all these changes have been, I think we've all found out. Again, you and I couldn't be on Zoom as of 3 months ago. Now we're recording on and putting it out to the world on YouTube. So it's pretty remarkable how quickly you can learn new things. But last but not least, end of the day, cleanup. So in terms of, this one might surprise people, because again, I think headline versus trend line. One of the headlines is, boy, is someone else going to be sitting at my desk. How long can germs live on a desk? What can I do? Is it being cleaned enough? Who's cleaning it? Funny enough, the anxiety level on this one, only a 2 out of 5. The frustration level, only a 1 out of 5. People really aren't that worried. They appreciate that every single night that offices are cleaned. I think most offices have really stepped up in terms of the amount of deep cleaning that they're doing, whether it's every single night, whether it's rotating in shifts, which is one thing we should talk about quickly. Whether you want to call it, group A back to the office Monday, Tuesday, deep clean on Wednesday, group B back on Thursday, Friday. We're seeing that a lot. I think you even might see some schools in the school boards in Toronto adopt that coming to the fall. So whether it's grouping, whether it's working in designated desks, depends on your office. Some people won't be working at the desk they're usually working with. I can tell you, for us and our teams, Mike, our teams right now sit in a row. You and I each work on 4-person teams. There's no way all 4 of us can be in the office sitting in our 4 cubicles going back. So, there will be people sharing cubicles. There will be ways to do that. I think, again, this isn't really high on the anxiety list. This isn't really high on the frustration list. I think, wipe everything down. Deep clean when you can with your janitorial crews. Landlords have obviously really stepped up in terms of the janitorial that they are providing. I know this one might sound self-explanatory. Mike, anything else to really add to that one? But I think it is,
I think there is one important point here, because we've heard this especially early on, is this idea of de-densification. And initially, de-densification meant, do I need to take my furniture and spread it apart? So in an ideal world, yes, and maybe that'll help with your longer term strategy, but it's not easy to spread your furniture apart. It was not how you floor plan and space plan that space to occupy it. And in a lot of these buildings, you had to core through the concrete to put those cable drops in there for those individual desks. So you can't just move them apart by 6 inches. The amount of work is monumental. So when it comes to how do we make this back to normal, it's probably not with a furniture solution like that. It's probably with the hoteling, spreading people apart based on where they're seating. Maybe it's the shared desk or not. Maybe it's dividers, which we haven't seen or heard a ton of, but it's the phased approach which will do that.
It's exactly.
Companies who are thinking about de-densifying, they might run down that path, but we've seen it just really isn't realistic unless they're going through a move in general.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. That's, I guess, the last part of your day as you clean your desk. And now, given that Toronto and the neighboring communities are open, you can go to a patio and enjoy a drink with your friends and colleagues afterwards. So that kind of, I think, gives a pretty good example of what people can expect as they go by. I think it's more critical than ever. Just work with your employees, communicate, understand everyone's anxiety levels are going to be different. Their frustration levels all might be very similar, but anxiety levels are going to be different. This isn't normal times anymore, but there are ways to make it more normal for your employees coming back. And I think the overall sentiment is people do want to get back, which is always positive. So how can you as an employer or you as an employee just make it a more comfortable place for all the people that you're working with, a more productive place, as we talked about last week, and just a place that people want to be excited about coming back, because I think people are excited to be back.
For sure.
So with that said,
I would say one thing in terms of reaching out to us, we have a great report. We have a few great reports, but one that really outlines, it was almost our theme of today, is a day in the life. And if you want a really good visual with these anxiety stats and these frustration stats, great infographic slideshow. So please reach out to us. More than happy to send it to you, and it'll give you a more visual sense of the exact conversation we had today.
Yeah, great point. Thank you for bringing that up again. If anyone wants it, you get it. Either Mike and I were happy to share and go into more details, because it is really fascinating. Mike, for week 2, thanks for the conversation, and look forward to talking with you and with everyone else next week.
See you, Matt.